Hey everyone, Troy Hammond here, and welcome to the We Fucking Love Startups podcast. On today's episode, we're going to be chatting with James Powell. James is the co-founder, the CFO, and the Spaceplane chief engineer of Dawn Aerospace. You've been asking, and we finally came through. We're now doing space on the podcast. And so James is going to talk us through what they're doing at Dawn Aerospace. He's going to talk through their three steps that they've been taking in terms of getting these planes up into space, into low orbit. It's a super interesting chat. I had to learn how to become basically an engineer to have this podcast, and so enjoy and actually listen to James, who's an actual smart person, and me asking dumb questions so that I could try and understand what the hell was going on, and that hopefully lots of people can understand the conversation as well. It was a fantastic chat, and I think you're going to enjoy it.
Kia ora. Thanks for tuning into the We Fucking Love Startups podcast, brought to you by Talent Army.
How does this all feel to you now that it's sort of all blowing up, right? And you're a part of something that you can't control anymore?
Probably don't think about it like I can't control it, or like we can't sufficiently control it. But I don't know.
Obviously, you can. Hopefully, you can control exactly what you're building. But the media and the marketing and stuff.
Sure. I was, like, early on, actually, there was, when I'd had like no real exposure to media and stuff generally, there was a bunch of articles you'd get written and things like that, and they'd get a bunch of stuff wrong. And at first I was like, oh man, like what the hell? Like, that's just technically incorrect, or like, and it's not like it was bad or anything, but it's just
annoying.
Hey, that's just wrong. That's just not what it is. And so I'd want to correct it and want to tell them hey, look, here's the thing. This is what it should be. And then after a while, I was like, oh, you just got to let it go. It's not the end of the world.
I can tell you, as someone that, I do a lot of podcasts, right? Normally I can research a couple of people a couple of nights before, go, yep, right, I know exactly what the company does. I can sort of talk about it really well. And then I was thinking about Dawn Aerospace the other night. I was like, oh, fuck. And so I've read a lot, and I'm definitely now a propulsion engineer.
Great.
After my reading, so we can go deep on topics. So, it must be challenging for a lot of media trying to understand exactly what's happening. So I guess if you were to say, hey, this is the elevator pitch of what Dawn Aerospace is doing, what would that be?
Yeah, so Dawn's really a space transportation company at heart. So right from the start of Dawn, we recognized that there are various aspects to space transportation, and none of them are done as well as they could be. And we really want to make space transportation much more scalable and much more sustainable, because these are two factors that we observe just don't exist and are necessary.
Can we break down space transportation? Are we talking about commercial people or physically taking objects into space? Or?
Yeah. So there's two main aspects for us. There's getting from Earth to space, and then getting from space to everywhere else. So the first part of that is launch, so Earth to orbit, and then moving around in orbit and so on. So the satellite transportation, the satellite propulsion, that's the products that we sell now. We very consciously wanted to get product that we could get to market early, because our observation was that there are a lot of space companies out there that raise hundreds of millions, if not billions of dollars, and spend a decade before they've got a product to sell. And that's a pretty tough business model for various reasons. So we actually wanted to really avoid that as much as possible and get something that we can get a product and get it to market and start selling it and making money off it really early. And the satellite propulsion was something that we recognized this is a necessary part of the transportation network, and it's something that's not done as well as it could be. And we believe we've got some unique technology to do that much better, and we can get that to market really, really quickly. So, within a couple of years, we're manufacturing and selling that product.
So what is the satellite propulsion? Are you talking about the actual hardware to move the satellites around in space or to get them to orbit?
It's to move stuff around in space. So the simplest analogy that I've kind of thought of with this is you can think about a satellite like a boat. Like if you've got a boat, you've got a little dinghy or something, you can row that around, you can go fishing. It's a boat, it works as a boat. Just like if you've got a satellite, it works as a satellite. Now, if you put an outboard motor on that boat, now you can go water skiing, now you can go way out to some further away islands, now you can go to a better fishing spot. Just like with a satellite, when you put an engine on it, which is what we sell, the engine for a satellite, now you can do a ton more with that satellite. The commercial utility of that satellite is much greater. The lifetime of that satellite much greater. So it just makes it a much more powerful, much more valuable asset when you put an engine on it.
So I read that you're 10xing its lifetime by your technology, these satellites.
Yep. So what tends to happen, this depends on the orbit you fly to, but if you fly to a low orbit, which is where most satellites are these days, low Earth orbit, you encounter atmospheric drag, and then that changes your orbit. Eventually you burn up in the atmosphere. If you put an engine on board, you can compensate for that drag, and so you can extend the life of your satellite.
Awesome. And so for people listening to this, right, they're thinking, oh my God, there's so many satellites in space now, right? Like, can you talk us through what are should people be worried about the amount of satellites in space, or is it just something you shouldn't even think about?
Definitely should worry about it. So this is a big part of the sustainability aspect of Dawn. So to operate a satellite in a sustainable manner, at the end of its life, you've got to get it out of orbit, because then it's not in everybody else's way, which might be your way when you want to launch a new satellite. Now, if you have propulsion on board, just like the boat bobbing around the ocean, if that's got an engine, you can get it back into port and get rid of it. Now you can clear that part of the ocean or space, as it were, up. So your satellite's in orbit, it's at the end of its life, you use that engine to get it out of orbit. Now that's all clear.
And when you say get it out of orbit, do you mean getting it out of it to burn up or to actually land back down?
Oh, burn up.
Cool. Yeah. All right, awesome. Man, interesting, really interesting. And then, so, I mean, like I was reading a lot, and then so phase 2 sounds even super interesting in terms of what you're doing. So I guess for people that haven't been reading this and don't know what I'm talking about here, can you talk through the 3 stages, of what you're doing?
The first aspect, like we've talked about, is the satellite propulsion technology, then expanding that out to broader capability in space transportation. And then the launch capability is indeed very early in its R&D stage at the moment. So that's essentially... So it's still a 2-stage system. So when you fly to orbit, Falcon 9 on SpaceX or something, the rocket launches, then the first stage for SpaceX comes back and lands, then the second stage boosts off to orbit. So our architecture is that same 2-stage principle, but for the first stage instead we use a plane. So the plane takes off and lands from a runway, just like a regular plane. When it gets to sort of about 100 kilometers, sort of the boundary of space, then the second stage deploys from that and flies to orbit. Then the first stage, being the plane, comes back and lands. Load a new second stage, load a new satellite, refuel it, and then off you go and take off again.
So the second stage is a module that just comes off the plane?
Effectively, yeah. So like in terms of architecture, it's pretty roughly similar to traditional second stage. That it's a big fuel tank, a big engine, and satellite on top.
And so how the hell do you do all this from New Zealand? Is my question, right? Because obviously we've got space program now, which is fantastic, right? And I think MBIE and government have been good in terms of like helping and supporting, but these are big, huge goals and things to do from New Zealand and from Christchurch, right? And so how did you even get this across the line in the first place?
So my background is aerospace, but not so like helicopters and aircraft and stuff like that. And New Zealand actually has a very unique regulatory framework globally, and I worked a lot with the regulator, Civil Aviation Authority here. And actually became a delegate of the director, which means I can act as the director in an engineering capacity. And so I knew the system very well and had a lot of clout with the regulator. So when, and the way we fly and the way we intend to launch is much more like an aircraft down at those low altitudes than a rocket. And so adopting those aviation principles and working in that kind of structure is very unique and something we were very uniquely placed to do, both us as a team, but also New Zealand as a nation and as a regulatory system. So there's a bunch of unique regulations in New Zealand that mean that the way we obtain a license to fly our spaceplane, it's pretty unparalleled globally. And the license that we have for at the moment, we can fly as much as we want any day of the week, and that's totally unique. When you launch a rocket, you're more or less launching a missile, and you got to be pretty careful about that for very good reasons. So you got to shut down a bunch of airspace and shut down a bunch of sea space and make sure you can't crash into anyone and all those appropriate things. But when you operate an aircraft, there's 100,000 planes a day taking off globally, all over the place, middle of cities and stuff, because of the way that's been developed to do that safely, reliably, consistently, and so on.
And is it still just air traffic control, talking to air traffic control and saying, hey, we're about to hit the space now?
Like more or less, it actually is. So, we have a pilot. The pilot is on the radio. The pilot is making call. Actually, we've got a bunch of crew. The pilot can be on the radio, but there's also other crew, just like you have a co-pilot in other aircraft. And so we have crew talking to radio, talking to any other airspace users. It's actually, whenever you have a question about how do you launch your space plane, most of the answers are in the same way as a plane. How does it take off from a runway like a plane? How does it land on a runway like a plane? Does it use wheels? Yes, because a plane does. The only difference is It has a rocket engine, not a gas turbine or propeller piston engine or something. Has a reaction control system, so it can fly beyond the atmosphere. And it carries all of its oxidizer on board because there's no oxygen to burn once you get to space. But otherwise, more or less like a plane.
Can we talk about the plane?
Yeah.
So, for people listening to this, maybe can you describe the plane in terms of how big it is compared to a traditional sort of commercial aircraft or jet plane?
Sure. So the version we're flying at the moment, the Mark II Aurora, so that's about the size of a car. So it's 4.8 meters long, 2.4 meter wingspan. It's up to about 350 kilogram takeoff weight, so quite a lot lighter than a car, as you'd probably expect. But that's a subscale demonstrator. So that's for us to learn all of the hard problems and all the things we don't know about a suborbital flight profile, about a first stage flight profile. The next version of that, which is the orbital system, the Mark III, that's a lot larger because it has to carry a lot more payload to carry that second stage to then fly to orbit. So the Mark III is more like sort of small business jet. If you've ever flown on like an ATR from like Christchurch to Wellington or those sort of like regional aircraft, the sort of 50, 60 person ones, it's about that size. So it's sort of more like 20-ton takeoff weight. Just trying to think of the latest parametric design we've done, but it's it's of the order of 20 meters long, sort of thing.
Awesome. And so what are the cost of these things to build?
So that's not really something we disclose, but the really key aspect in terms of economics that differentiates this is you're reusing this thing, dozens, if not hundreds of times, if not even thousands of times. Like the unit economics of operating an aircraft is completely different to a rocket. You build a rocket, it's a very complex, expensive piece of machinery, and you fly it once, or in the case of SpaceX, a dozen times or maybe a bit more. And SpaceX are just so unique globally doing this. Everyone else builds and flies it once. So, you build this amazing, expensive piece of hardware, you fly it once. If you fly that thing twice, you've halved the capital cost, right? If you fly it 10 times, you've reduced that capital cost by 90%, right? So for us, even if the Spaceplane cost 5 times as much, which it doesn't, but even if it did, if we fly it 5 times now, we're even. If we fly it 10 times now, we're twice as good. If we fly it 20 times, 30 times, 50, 100 times really quickly, like our capital cost per flight becomes negligible.
And your goal is to fly it like 2 to 3 times a day, is that right?
Yeah. Like one of the absolutely fundamental underlying principles is you can operate this like an aircraft, and that means flying it multiple times per day.
Cool. And can in terms of the jet propulsion, so like you've got propulsion technology, green propulsion technology, is that right? And so can you talk me through, obviously I'm a propulsion engineer now, so we could have a really complex conversation on it, but if for people listening that aren't a propulsion engineer, what does it actually mean?
So on the plane, so the propellants that we use is hydrogen peroxide and kerosene, essentially. So peroxide is pretty unique, and the reason we use it's been used a whole bunch in rocket stuff generally, but never really at large scale. Now, the big reason we chose it as opposed to liquid oxygen, which is the common one, is it's storable. So when a rocket is on the launch pad, it's got this big hose connected to it, and it's got steam pouring off it because that liquid oxygen is negative 200 and whatever degrees it's boiling off. But hydrogen peroxide is it's water with extra oxygen in it, basically. It'll just sit there for the whole day, no problem. So it means we can fuel the plane up. We can roll it out to the runway, we can have it on the apron, ready to go, again, just like an aircraft, so that integrating with traffic and integrating with the airspace and so on is achievable and easy and manageable,
How do you feel that, obviously you got a pilot on a plane, that you built, bespoke plane.
Pilot stays on the ground, but...
Oh, pilot stays on the ground?
Yeah.
All right, so just like full... Remote.
Yeah.
Oh, awesome. I was going to ask because like we're looking at like submarines and stuff that have, and you're like, holy shit, how do you feel as someone that's sending technology and potentially people in planes and aircrafts,
Yeah, well, I mean, like, again, my job prior to Dawn was working on aircraft with people on them, and a big part of becoming a delegate was like really understanding, like, right, I'm going to put people on this plane, including myself, on test flights and so on. So we need to be like damn sure this thing's going to work and it's not going to hurt anyone. And we've all got really high expectations for reliability of aircraft, and so we should. And so, that engineering integrity is absolutely critical for building a safe system. And the context is a bit different when the people stay on the ground, but there are still people around. There are still crew operating it. There are still, there's still the public and property. So you absolutely still have to know how you manage the safety of all of that crew and all the public and everything. The way you do it is a bit differently, and certainly, there are scenarios where you can tolerate something failing on the aircraft because it's remotely piloted that you wouldn't if there were people on board, because the consequence is obviously a lot different.
Yeah.
But fundamentally, it's still it's critical that you build a safe system.
Yeah. And how do you feel like, because obviously New Zealand's space program is immature, right, in terms of like the people here. Have you had to bring in a lot of people into New Zealand in terms of building this company, or is it a mixed bag of like training up Kiwis?
Yeah, it's really both. So we certainly have brought in a lot of people from overseas, mostly Europe. So you can't easily bring people from the States because of American trade law, like ITAR it's called, but protection of aerospace industry, essentially is what it is. But yeah, so brought in a lot of European people. There's a lot of really deep experience in space industry in Europe. And then lots and lots of training up people here as well. So I mean, we work really closely with the universities, with the engineering departments to figure out how we get more people into this industry, how we develop training programs for them and stuff. So I'm on the industry advisory board for Canterbury University. So work with their mechanical engineering department to what do we need to train these kids on. How can we teach them better? What are the things we want them to learn about so that they can graduate and become awesome aerospace engineers? Yeah,
awesome. So, and what types of people you're going to be looking for over the next wee while? Is it more just aerospace engineers in particular, or is it anything else?
The company is predominantly an engineering R&D company at the moment. So definitely the majority of our hires are engineering, and it's all applied in an aerospace context. But that means mechanical engineers, electrical, software, mechatronics. These are kind of the main domains we tend to recruit from in an engineering context. But then, the company still has, finance, HR, sales, marketing, all those things as well.
Yeah.
So,
Awesome. And where do you find your people? Like, obviously universities, globally, in terms of European space. But what about the average person listening here? Like, is there something that they can go off and do to get themselves into the space industry?
Yeah, definitely. So, again, a big part of this is engineering, and if you look at NASA or something, like a huge portion of that is engineering as well. And the core aspects of engineering, I think, is like good like science and mathematics, but then creativity is absolutely critical as well. And our best engineers are always the ones, or the best engineers anywhere, are always the ones that think of something outside the box and think of like, hey, actually, I know how we can do this better. And then they go and build it and pull it off. So, and to do that, especially when you're solving really hard problems, you've got to have a really good science and mathematics base to start from, because you've got to figure out complicated things and you've got to do the math to figure out how you're going to make this work. So you've got to have that good like academic base. That doesn't... you don't have to go to university to learn that stuff, but it's a tried and true way to do it. So
you'd hope they have.
Exactly. But then really just building stuff as well. Like I loved Lego when I was a kid. All of the best people we recruit and the best people who applied, they've been building stuff since they were 10 years old, sort of thing. And you really can see the difference of that. And when they're leaving high school, when they're in university, they're joining all the clubs and building the race cars or building the rockets at uni or all that kind of stuff, or building the circuit boards, or even writing the code, like building the software programs or whatever it is. Like any of these things, I think really the most important thing is like just build stuff. Like just build stuff. Like go from idea to thing that works. Like forcing yourself to go through that whole process is so much more valuable than just, I can do this math, I can do that calculus. I can answer the problem in the textbook. That's totally different to I can apply what the textbook tells me to do, and I can transform it into a new awesome thing that no one's seen before.
That's awesome, man. I mean, fantasy career, right? Like for little kids out there building, building rockets, and then now working in the space industry.
Yeah, definitely.
So what, like I want to go into the future now in terms of doing aerospace, right? And so talk to me about what do we see going forward?
Yeah. So again, like what we really want to enable is that the space industry can scale up substantially, and that it can do that sustainably, because right now, or historically, the space industry hasn't cared about sustainability because performance is all that matters, and to get to orbit, that's the only thing you can afford to do. But ongoing, and you mentioned about like space junk and space debris earlier. Longer term, we will need to pay attention to those things.
They're all mapped, obviously, in the in orbit, I assume.
So everything larger than kind of like your fingernail can be tracked, but there's like hundreds of thousands of little pieces of flecks of paint and things like that can't be tracked. And, those things are going 25,000 kilometers an hour. So, they can really do some, even a fleck of paint can go through go through a piece of glass on a window of a space station or something.
And so do you have to monitor? Can you monitor that? Well, you can't monitor them if you can't track them, right?
Yeah, exactly. So this is part of why it's important to be increasingly responsible in space. And another kind of unique thing about New Zealand, like it's small and so it's agile, and the government is relatively agile as well. I'm sure a lot of people will be surprised to hear that, but it really is. Recently the Space Agency put out new space policy, which gave new policy on how we manage space sustainability, and there's a lot of world firsts in there, which is really awesome to see.
Well, you'd hope that. I mean, New Zealand's historically great with sustainability, right? And so you'd hope that we'd extend that to Earth, to space as well.
Yeah, totally. Yep.
Awesome. All right. So now, if we go back a little bit, we're talking about the future, but now if we go back, like, what has been the hardest challenges for you?
Get asked this quite a lot. There are many things about a startup that are super hard.
Well, I mean, any startup's hard, right?
Yeah.
Add what you guys are doing.
Yeah,
fucking hard.
So I always think about these as all of your problems are people problems. Any challenge, it doesn't matter what you need to do. If you find the right person, you'll solve it. So, like, do you need to sell more stuff? Find a good salesperson. Do you need better marketing? Find a good marketing person. Do you need better financial projections? Find a good, financial analyst. Do you need to build some crazy new rocket engine? Find an awesome combustion analyst, or whatever it is. Like, it doesn't matter what your problem, what your challenge, what your opportunity is. If you find the right person, that thing will go away, and that opportunity will be capitalized on. And like, I'm really a firm believer in that, because I've seen so many things that were so hard for us to get through, and you find the right person and put them on it, and empower them to go and solve it, and they run with it, and they come back and you're like, holy shit, that's awesome.
Yeah. But obviously you can't start with 500 people with global experience, right, that unlock everything for you. So like, how do you even start this, right? Like, so how do you talk me through the process of like, okay, we think this is possible, we think we can do this. How do you then go out and find the money and build a prototype, and in the early days?
Yeah, so I think having an important and exciting mission is really the key to that. So I went to NASA, one of the NASA sites, like 15 or 20 years ago, and you could just tell there's this buzz there, and everyone was real stoked. And I like ran into this a guy mopping the floor. And I was like, why is everyone here stoked? And he's like, we went to the freaking moon, man. Like, and we're going to Mars, and we're doing, how can you not be excited about that? And like, this guy, he's literally mopping the floor, right? Like, he's
that is
probably
cool,
not going to space. Yeah. But, he knows he's a part of a big, exciting, important mission. And that's, definitely a big part of, Dawn, as we believe, is on a big, important, exciting mission. And so telling people like, hey, look, we want to do this. We want to make this happen. We want to make this change happen in the world and in space. If you want to be a part of it, like, come along. And, that's compelling.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
Good. You definitely got a strong employer brand there
in
terms of attracting people.
Yeah.
How does it work with like other space companies, like other companies, like aerospace companies? Like, obviously you got Peter Beck in Auckland, and you've got NASA and European ones. And so, do you collaborate? Obviously, you guys have attracted a lot of media internationally now. How does that all work in terms of dealing with each other, or is it quite a separate thing?
It's not a separate thing. I mean, I think one aspect to recognise is like aerospace in New Zealand existed, more than 20 years ago. It was just, it wasn't space so much, but there were a bunch of companies that still made stuff for NASA and so on. But there was a whole bunch of aviation which still has a lot of the same principles as space stuff. And a lot of that existed, the Air Force in New Zealand, the places that I worked beforehand. So, there's a ton of industry here. There's a ton of people who know how to build aircraft and fix aircraft and all that kind of thing. That definitely does exist here. And that's been a really important like talent pool and capability and like industrial capability to tap into and so on as well.
Yeah, awesome. And so if we talk about space now, so obviously there's a lot of billionaires, trying to get to space and get commercial, basically people to be able to get to space, right? Visit. What's your thoughts on that? Like in terms of like regular people being able to go in space now?
Oh, I mean, the short answer is I think it's awesome. I think it's, I've had the real privilege of meeting a few astronauts, and they are such incredible people. Like, they're such knowledgeable, well-rounded people, and they have such an amazing perspective on the whole world and every aspect of it, like society, economics, technology, all these things. A part of that is the incredibly rigorous training they have to go through. But, you really often hear this thing, the overview effect that astronauts talk about, that you go to space and you see this little blue marble. You think like, wow, that's our home. Like, we've got to look after that. That's a special place. And it really seems like seeing that really teaches you things and makes you realize things like, okay, we're all on one team here. We're all got to make this work. We've got to work together. Maybe, we've all got our differences as well, obviously, but that doesn't mean we can't collaborate and we can't work together. And actually, we need to all work together. So I think the more people that see that, the more people that feel that, the more people that are exposed to that, the better. And you might say, I'm kind of shooting from the hip here, but you might say that a bunch of those billionaires would benefit from some more of that holistic perspective, potentially. I mean, we all would, but I'm sure a lot of people will be like, they don't get me.
Yeah.
And, maybe this would help them.
Well, I don't believe that anyone could go to space and not have that overview effect, right? Like, how do you see, when you break it down, that the Earth is this tiny little thing, and then how do you even worry about the shit that we squabble with on a day-to-day basis, right?
Totally. We're all crew on Spaceship Earth, and like we've all, when you're on a crew, it doesn't matter. Like, it doesn't matter if it's your school team, your rugby team, your work team. Like, that team does best when you work as a team. So if you can see and better realize, like, we're one team here.
100%, man. 100%. Yeah. And I mean, I think companies like yours are evident, right? Like, if you just get people on a mission and you show them that, hey, we can do this. You see the benefits of people just working together as one team. And hey, so look, I always say to people, like, if we're looking back at, like our journey as founders and the likes, we obviously we think about the hard stuff, and we get asked a lot about what's been the hardest thing. What have been the bigger moments for you and your team, like, as you've gone through? Like, what have been the moments you've been like, oh my God, I can't believe that happened now? And have there been things that surprised you in these moments, or as obviously like the first flight?
I was going to say, definitely first flight of the Mark II jumps out of that. Like, first flight of any aircraft is always a monumental achievement. You've poured your heart and soul into this for so long. You put so much effort into it and stuff. And when that thing came back and landed on the runway and came to a stop, I was just like, oh man. Yeah. Like I actually couldn't talk for like half an hour.
I can't even imagine the feeling. But talk me through that feeling leading up to that, right? Like, that day, what are you feeling? Obviously, is it just your brain getting analytical in terms of checking everything?
Yeah, so again, like, prior to dawn, like, I did a bunch of aircraft development and stuff, and did tons of flight testing and so on. And like I'm in the cockpit with the pilot, and like lots of it is pretty serious stuff. Like, we go and fly, did an engine upgrade to replace the engines on a helicopter, and part of that is doing auto rotation testing, which is when the engines fail. Yeah. So we took off, we flew up real high, and you basically shut the engines down. You actually put them to idle, but they're effectively off. Yeah. And so now you're just dropping like a stone, right? And like, I'm in there next to the pilot, and you don't do that unless you're really prepared to do that, right? Yeah. So you've made a really good flight test plan. You've figured out all the stuff that could go wrong and how you're going to handle it. You've made all your mitigation plans. You've understood how you're going to handle this. You've rehearsed it. You've done all your crew training and everything. So when it comes to it, you're ready, and you're ready to go. And
are you really though? Like, because it's still like anxiety must, like, when the moment.
I think, like, personally, no, not really. And I think that's the way it should be. And it's the same thing. So like I've flown fly aircraft and stuff as well. Yeah. When you first go solo, like, that's you flying the plane. It's your, like, if you don't get it back on the ground, you're the one that probably is going to die. But when I went solo, I wasn't like, holy shit, man, I've got to get this plane on the ground. Like, I'm like, yeah, no, I'm familiar. I'm comfortable. I believe I know how to do this. And so you go and do it, and you land the plane, and it's okay. And it's the exact same thing with first flight. And, we rehearsed that as a crew. We trained for that as a crew. We understood what our mitigations were for our risks.
What were the biggest risks you were worried about?
I mean, like, the short answer is crashing the plane. Yeah. And the biggest consequence of that is basically killing someone, right? Now, that's an extremely remote probability because of all of the systems and methods that we put in place. But, you talk through, and you work through, like, okay, what are the things that could cause that? Like, okay, how could the aircraft even be going for someone in the first place? Because we arrange a flight test plan that basically means the aircraft is never pointing at a person. So it just can't really go towards a person. But anyway, you go through all this prep and rehearsal and training and so on. And then, so when we actually did the flight, I'm next to the pilot. I've got my flight test cards. I've got my checklist. This is what we're going through.
Yeah.
He knows as well. And we're stepping through it, and we're going through a routine just like we have over and over when we've rehearsed it. So it all feels very systematic and practiced and routine and understood and known. And if something goes wrong, I know what I'm going to do, and I know what I'm going to do to handle that. So it's actually fine. And yeah, we went through that. We landed the plane. It was all good. And I think really what evidences this to me, like to your question, were you stressed out or whatever? At the time, I was like, no, that's sweet. And we have it all voice recorded and stuff.
Yeah.
About a year later, I went and back and listened to the voice recording, and I couldn't handle it. I was like,
was it the same emotions again?
No, it was way worse. It was because I wasn't practiced and rehearsed and
you went in
routine and
the
ready.
zone.
Yeah, exactly. So it's like, man, that's fucking stressful. I almost couldn't listen to it. And I'm just listening to it. I'm not even watching the video or anything. But at the time, I was like, nah. And in the zone. This is fine. Yeah. And I think that's how you should be. And going back to the solo thing, you shouldn't go fly a plane solo unless you feel like you can do that.
Yeah.
And same, you shouldn't do a space, you definitely shouldn't be an astronaut if you don't feel like you're comfortable doing that. In that kind of scenario.
Yeah, I get it. I completely get it. I mean, it's foreign in terms of the complexity of challenges that I would have to solve, it's foreign to me. But it's similar, if I'm doing a presentation, at a conference in front of 10,000 people, if I know my subject really well and I've rehearsed it, I can walk on stage and just go on autopilot almost, right? And but...
Exactly, I was going to turn around and say, look, I bet a ton of people would feel real uncomfortable sitting in your seat right now, but, you got it. It's fine.
Yeah, awesome, man. Yeah. And so it's been so cool being in Christchurch doing these podcasts. Right? I feel like a real buzz of energy in Christchurch, and I've travelled a lot to here, to Christchurch. I'm an Aussie, moved to Wellington, been in Wellington 16 years, and so I've come on and off to Christchurch. But I feel like over the last 3 to 4 years, it's just something's happening here now. It's really it's just taking off the innovation, in Canterbury.
Yep.
And so, how do you foresee in terms of the Canterbury, ecosystem here growing?
So I think it's a really, really good place for that. It's got an excellent engineering school. To build new technology, you need engineers are a huge part of that. So if there's a good talent stream of engineers, that's a critical part of that. And you look at Silicon Valley and stuff like Stanford around the corner. I think it's a pretty established that's a big factor. And then there's a good base of industry and stuff. It's a reasonable sized city, so there's all the general facilities and stuff you want from a city. But it's also such an easy city to live in. I was actually thinking this exactly this morning because I, got up, looked, I was like, okay, how long is it going to take me to get to the city? Traffic and everything, and it was 15 minutes. And, I live right on the outskirts of town. There's basically a chairlift in my backyard and a mountain bike park, right?
Awesome.
And it's 15
Is that
minutes.
at the Adventure Park?
Yeah, exactly.
Oh, it's a great spot.
Yeah. But, I'm on the edge of the city,
and
it's 15 minutes to get to downtown at 8 o'clock in the morning on a weekday.
Fantastic.
A lot of people ask, why in Christchurch? And, that's probably not the primary factor, but it is a massive, massive benefit. And it just, life's just so easy here. It takes me normally 10 or 11 minutes to get to work. If it's the worst traffic possible, it's 14 minutes. And that's pretty unparalleled in a lot of places. So that ease of life and that quality of life and stuff is pretty good here.
And there's something about when you have a mentally exhaustive job, being able to get to work easy, being able to get to a thing in a calm, relaxed manner, to be able to stay at your work is such a powerful thing, I think.
Totally. So one of my kind of objectives I feel of my job as one of the co-founders of the company is I want to make this the environment for people to do their life's best work. That's one of the most important parts of my job. And to do your life's best work, you need everything else in your life to be as easy as possible, right? Like you said, if you've got a demanding job, you don't also want a demanding commute and a demanding mortgage to pay. And the amount of the less of that other stuff, the better. So being in a place where that other stuff is easier is really, really great. And that extends to the other aspects of the job and the culture and the working environment and stuff that we do everything we can, within reason, obviously, but more or less everything we can to make it that employees can come to work and they can focus on doing an awesome job and they don't need to worry about anything else.
Yeah. Cool. And so how do you so now you've got a company, right, that's scaling, right? And so what are the company problems that you're sort of worried about now that aren't probably more your traditional problems in aeronautics that you're facing?
Again, I would say it's all of these things come back to people. Like you get the right people and it's solved. Like,
how many people are you now?
Just over 125.
Yeah.
I really think, like, you want to set up a new program or set up a new team. Like, if you recruit the right person who knows how to grow and build a team, that opportunity is taken care of now. That's really the biggest thing. I mean, like, there's obviously a whole bunch of the mechanics of operating a company and making sure that you have revenue and you can pay your bills and cash flow's all fine, and like, the workplace just works, like all the infrastructure of a company and stuff. Like, obviously you've got to have all that stuff running as well. But again, I really just think of that all just comes back to people. If you have the right people in place to make sure those things happen, then they happen.
Yeah, definitely not as easy as like a traditional SaaS, software as a service startup where you can raise $1 million, like off the back of a napkin and say,
So I have thought about SaaS a bit here and there because it's obviously such a huge part of the startup ecosystem generally, and I definitely agree there's likely to be many aspects of a SaaS company that are easier than deep tech. Aerospace or whatever, you don't have to deal with procurement and supply chain to the same extent. You don't have to deal with hardware generally. You don't have to set up a manufacturing facility. All these kinds of things are not, for the most part, I expect, challenges in SaaS. But I've often thought, like, man, like, if you build a cool app or whatever, and then like Google or Facebook is like, oh man, that's sweet. Or Amazon. Let's build that. Exactly. Like, all right, now you're up against billions of dollars and 1,000 strong engineers ready to go. And like, I'm often like, geez, how do you possibly maintain a lead against that?
Yeah, it's funny. It's always funny when you think about different industries and the likes. There's always pros and cons. The grass is always greener on the other side, right? Like in different challenges.
Yeah.
So no one can. So Elon or Jeff can't just copy what Dawn's doing right now and say, hey, we're going to do this now.
They especially people with that level of resource and influence, they definitely could have a pretty damn good go at it if they wanted to. We're certainly under no illusion of that, but I don't actually think they want to. I don't think it's in their mandate. Like Elon wants to go to Mars and there's no runways on Mars, so a space plane's a dumb idea for him in the first place. There's a bunch of other reasons it doesn't suit his general trajectory. So
he's busy cage fighting Mark Zuckerberg at the moment.
I heard.
Hey, I saw a quote that said to you, I think this is from your CEO, you said to his knowledge, Dawn now operates the most rapidly reusable rocket-powered aircraft in the world. Can you talk through that? Like, that's phenomenal, right? It's totally a fucking quote,
Yeah. Well, so I'm not sure I don't even know if this is still on our website, but did you see the Mark 1?
Yeah.
So, we built that in before we did a seed round to prove, like, look, this harebrained scheme of a rocket-powered thing, you fly and take off and land and put more fuel in it and go again. Like, that's not just some harebrained scheme. Like, we literally can build that, and we did build it, and we turned that thing around in under an hour. One flight to the next. But the Mark II, as far as we've seen, as far as we've heard, as far as so unless there's some secret military program, it is the only thing in the world that's taken off and landed under rocket power and done that 3 times in 3 days. That is transformative, and that's the whole point of the Spaceplane program. I mean, another thing that we really thought about right from the start of Dawn is there's no point in building something which is 10% better, 20% better, 50% better than the status quo. This has got to be an absolute paradigm shift. It's got to be an order of magnitude change, and even if you are, SpaceX is the best in the world at building rockets. No debate about that. They turn a Falcon 9 around, and I think their record is just under a month or something. And again, that's phenomenal. That's absolutely incredible for a rocket. But a rocket is just not the architecture to rapidly reuse it. But a plane, we all know, and lots of people have been on a plane that literally takes off, lands, more fuel, an hour later it's flying again. So a plane type architecture is just fundamentally so much more rapidly reusable, and so that's why we have adopted that architecture, and indeed the Mark II is the next stage of proof of that for us. That fly it, land it, put more propellant in it, go and fly again. And we haven't yet, but the last flight campaign that we did, our final objective was do 2 flights in a day, and it had been a long week. of lots of like flying and getting prepped up for flight and stuff. And and the weather kind of meant that we'd pushed right into the end of our of that week, and we were sort of just like, oh man, we don't need to tell everyone you've got to come in on Saturday to do 2 flights. Like, we've achieved all the goals. We know we can turn this thing around quickly. Like, it's just a paperwork exercise to do 2.
Yeah.
We know we could do that. So
yeah. I love that. It's very New Zealand too. And in the US, it would have been like, hey, Saturday and Sunday. Yeah. Hey, so talk me through. So, I mean, to a dumb propulsion engineer like me, right? It sounds pretty simple that obviously an aircraft would be better to get to space and reusable, right? But what about when you're in space? Like, so we're thinking about now, like moon bases and then going to Mars and the likes. Mm-hmm. Is that only done by obviously rockets, I assume? Yeah.
So just to clarify a bit about what you said, so we don't actually intend the plane to go to orbit. So it will fly a suborbital profile. So like the first stage of a rocket. So once you're in space, wings, no point, wheels, no point if there's no runway and so on. So definitely beyond Earth, no point at all in a space plane. And there's definite compromises in a space plane as well. So, you've got to carry all those wings and wheels and so on, and that's mass that basically isn't payload. For quite interestingly, so when SpaceX land a first stage of a Falcon 9, they have to carry a bunch of fuel to do their re-entry burns and their landing burns. And in terms of mass fraction, that propellant for those landing burns is actually really comparable to the mass fraction of us for the wings and landing gear and so on. So the physics actually is very, very closely matched in that regard. But in answer to your question, like those wheels and those wings on somewhere like the moon with no atmosphere and Mars with a fraction of the atmosphere on Earth, it's just not worth it. So it's not the right architecture for that. And we're under no illusion of that.
So you're not going to be putting a Tesla on a plane and flying it into space anytime soon?
Not in the near future. We've had a few interesting requests though to like take hops up and take like Red Bulls up and things like that, and this stuff really gives you wings, space wings now kind of thing.
What's been the craziest thing that you've thought? Imagine we could do that one day.
Oh, I mean, like, definitely want to like put this in the reasonably crazy and out there category, but like long term. The architecture that we're building, it is actually really well set up to take people, and so you're really talking like decades now. But if you could,
is there a waiting list? Can I sign up?
Well, no, but it's actually something we're kind of you got to love every idea for 5 minutes, but we're sort of like we'll put that in the like much later basket. But if you could jump on a space plane and fly to Aussie in 20 minutes, or fly to LA in 45 minutes.
Well, that was the first thing I thought about when I was watching your videos. I was like, surely this technology now can be used for commercial craft, right?
Yeah. So, and like transportation just enables so much of like societal and economic development and so on. Like, imagine if you could go have a meeting in London this morning and then come back and make it home for dinner, or like same thing, Aussie or LA or like wherever you want to go, New York and so on. Or like, you want to have a nice weekend getaway, and instead of going to Samoa, now you can go to Santorini or something like that. Like,
how are your guts when you get to Santorini though for a first time flyer?
Well, so this is actually another interesting aspect of our general like attitude to technology development. So one of our really important fundamental principles is like start small and learn early. So what that means is build whatever gets you flying quickest. And so if we start off carrying cargo, we can refine the way the flight works. We can understand all the G loads and the re-entry loads, and we can really prove that all of that stuff is smooth and manageable.
What are the G loads when you go into like low orbit? Like, so, what's the G's that you're hitting?
So when you take off, you're a bit over 1G, then that kind of tends to increase to roughly about 3G, and then on the second stage it depends on how you fly second stage, but normally it's around about the same.
So less than a fighter jet Gs. Wow, interesting.
So that's a lot of that, especially for like astronaut flights, is actually catered to the fact that humans need to not be ripped around too much.
Tom Cruise hasn't reached out to you yet to see if he can fly one of your planes?
No. But yeah, I mean, like the general method is, principle is that, indeed, you keep that reasonable. But like, going back to my point about like learn early and then grow, like nail it before you scale it. If we've done 1,000, 100,000, if we've been flying twice a day for 5 years, telling someone like, hey, we're going to put seats on this now and you can buy a ticket, that's a lot more compelling than, hey guys, we've got this new thing, pretty whiz-bang aircraft, pretty sure it's going to be fine, want a ticket, promise you might not die.
Yeah,
kind of like
it's called number 8 wire technology.
Yeah. Like it's just less compelling than, hey, you've seen it fly a whole bunch of times. It's fine. We don't have issues anymore.
Yeah.
Like, yeah.
If there was so this is your technology, right? And so you obviously know it inside and out. If you put a seat on it right now, would you feel comfortable flying in it?
Oh, so I mean, like the Mark II that we're flying right now isn't big enough to put a seat on it. But even if it was, no, I wouldn't put a person on it because it's not designed to human rated standards presently.
Yeah.
So,
Awesome. Yeah, cool. Yeah. All right. So, hey, how can New Zealand help in terms of what Dawn Aerospace is doing? What can we as the people and the government help?
Yeah. So we get a bunch of support from the government in terms of like getting our licenses and so on, and also like government grants through like Callaghan, and MB does research grants and things like that. And I'm a really, really strong believer that government supported R&D is really critical to a nation developing high tech, high value industry, and therefore increasing the productivity of people, and therefore increasing the average income of people basically. And I don't think anyone's going to say I want to lower average income. And I think Dawn has done pretty well to demonstrate a good return on investment with those government programs. So like as an example, in I think it was 2019, we got an MB Catalyst grant as part of one of our satellite engine development programs. That was a $500,000 grant from the government. We've so far sold over $4 million worth of that product, all exports. So $500,000 investment. There's now
$4 million investment.
Exactly, $4 million, and that's like only so far. This is a product on a production line, and within a couple of years as well, right? So, and there's been a bunch of other aspects, examples of this, but like in that particular grant, the total grant was $3 million. So the rest of it went out to other companies. I have no idea how they're going or if they're finished or whatever. But even if they all just didn't work at all, which R&D often doesn't work, that's part of it. But even if all of them didn't work, there's still been more income just from the one that Dawn worked. So I think like having an attitude of like, well, New Zealanders do have a good general attitude of like, let's give this a go. And I think kind of taking that to a larger scale and thinking like at a national level, like let's as a nation give this a go. Let's as a nation fund this. Let's as a nation support this. We all acknowledge it's not all going to work. Some of these will end up seeming like harebrained schemes afterwards, and they, didn't make a return. But the ones that do, it's so disproportionately worth it, and it's so disproportionately valuable to the economy and valuable to the people that work on it, valuable overall in terms of the productivity that you gain. And I think you really get a lot of like flow down from this as well, that you generate more tax. That means the government can support things like healthcare and education and all those good things a lot easier. So like it really, really helps the whole country, I think.
Yeah, and it stimulates like ecosystem growth, right? Like this is the thing that's most exciting for me is just your one company alone, right? It's probably going to stimulate a bunch of other companies popping off the back of it, right? And you're now pioneering, hey, what could be possible in New Zealand, right? For other people to start up and start thinking about it. And so
yeah, hopefully.
Where have you traditionally like got the money from? Has it been mostly from private investment, venture capital? Yeah,
so I mean, like really, really early on in the company, I put a bit of money in, and then worked pretty hard to get us ready for a seed round. So we did our seed round, which the Ice House led about a year later. So that's that's all private investment, venture capital. Then did our Series A last year, which Ice House led as well, and did a few like safe notes and things like that in between as well. So it's all, I mean, it's a private company. It's all been private investment. But one thing which is quite unique to Dawn compared to the vast majority of space companies anyway, like I was saying before, we were very conscious that we don't want to spend VC money for a decade before we've got a product to start selling. We want to get to products we can sell early. And so that satellite propulsion technology, that is something that we very intentionally sell early, a scaling up production of, manufacture at high margin. We can reinvest the profit from that in the company. We use that to support the company. That helps us keep the lights on and so on. And so So in July last year, before we'd done our Series A, we'd had more money come into at that point. We'd had more money come into the company from sales than from VC.
Wow. Yeah, I read the article on MBIE about that, man. Smart, like, great move. Really great move.
I mean, we're really just we're very conscious that it's a tough business model to have to get investors to chuck in a bunch more cash every year or two, sort of thing. Like,
yeah, I don't imagine the average archangel around New Zealand sitting there going, "Oh, space, I'll put that on my portfolio."
Yeah. I mean, it's a big cliff to jump off for sure. Yeah.
Awesome, man. All right, and so what, like, are you going to be constantly looking at increasing in terms of venture capital, or are you just hoping that you're going to get to the path of profitability quickly?
Well, so we've kind of always treated every round as like this is our last round. We've got to be able to. We've got to know what the path is to profitability if we never raise another dollar.
Yeah.
So that's always in the back of our mind is how do we do that, and knowing how we do that. Now, bootstrapping is usually a relatively slow way of growing your company, and so when the business is in a good place to do another venture round, then we're definitely open to it, and like that's definitely something we'll work on, because it is the way to scale faster, and we want to scale as fast as we can. Obviously balanced with some commercial sustainability in there as well. But yeah, definitely that's pretty likely.
Awesome,
in the future.
man.
Yeah.
Hey, how do you feel about, like, obviously awards coming up and stuff now, high tech awards? Is that something that you're like excited about? You're like, oh, it's cool.
Yeah, definitely. So I mean, we won Startup of the Year, I think, in 2020, and at the time, sort of wasn't I personally like super aware of the relevance of this, or like why does it matter or whatever, and was stoked to get it and so on.
Yeah.
But after getting it, was stoked to get nominated and so on, and then like after we got it, was like, wow, yeah, awesome. But really didn't realize, or probably just didn't think through how powerful of validation of that is for the team, that you're working on something important, and you're working on something that other people recognize as important, and so on. And so that was definitely, I think that's the most valuable part of it for us, is being able to, for the team, being able to see for themselves, like, hey, I really am working on something which is important and making a difference here.
Yeah, that's how I always feel about awards. You know, for my companies, like, I don't give a shit about me personally, but if we can win an award that the team can reflect on and say, I can turn around and say thank you for the hard work, you know, for the last 12 months or whatever it's been.
Yeah.
Awesome, man. Hey, so on our podcast, we're really, like, the reason why we set up the podcast in the first place is I own a recruitment company. I deal with the high growth startups, in particular. I get to hear all these really, really cool stories, right? And I get to take in all this information, and it just started getting, like, I started feeling selfish that there wasn't a place in New Zealand where I could go out and find this information or share this information with people. And so we set up the podcast to be able to sort of give that back. And it's something that we've tried to just get interesting people on, tell their stories in an open, honest, authentic way. And so we're trying to continue that with each episode now, and say, if I was to say, hey, like, one thing that I want to put in the show notes that's really moved you, like a piece of information, whether that be a book or a podcast or a talk that you've seen, or whatever it may be, is there something that you think, hey, everyone should go and check out this and take a look into it?
I really like reading, so I've read a lot of books. There's probably not one alone that jumps out. So, and I think, it really depends on the person and what they want to learn and understand and so on. But like the highlights for me have been Liftoff, which is about the early days of SpaceX. It's just an awesome story, but it's also just lots of cool anecdotes about how you build a high-tech company. Ashley Vance's biography on Elon Musk, same thing. I mean, like, he's pretty unarguably one of the best entrepreneurs ever. So lots of good stuff. I mean, again, it's just a great story. But lots of cool stuff to learn there.
Like, so Elon, right? Like, I'm authentically myself. I don't care if people like me or not, right? Like, and I'm prepared to say what I think, right? And because I think that the only way we can grow as people is that you've got to have a dialogue, an open discourse, right? And you can't be scared about offending people, because I'm just, going on thought experiments all the time, right? And I'm trying to understand things, and so I verbalize it. So you look at people like Elon. Do you think, Like, do we need more people like Elon in terms of challenging the status quo and, you know, just being aggressively crazy with their ideas?
Oh, I definitely think, I don't think Elon does everything, or rather, I wouldn't personally do everything the way that he does.
So you don't crazily tweet?
No, I don't. But I certainly wouldn't for a second think that I have any authority to tell him how to be better or something. But I definitely think that it's very important to challenge the status quo, and it's obviously important to do that respectfully, and, you know, think things through and think about new ideas, and you know, one of the things we have at Dawn is, like, one of the principles is like, love everything, love every idea for at least 5 minutes. So like, give everything the time of day. Like, don't just be like, that sounds stupid, or like, man, you're an idiot, or like, you know, how could you say that, or whatever. Like, give it the time of day. Actually properly think about it. Like, be open to, we might not be doing this as best as we could. Yeah, I think that's really important, and I think it's really, really powerful. And one of my kind of personal principles that I really, really love is this fact that ideas are not zero sum. So, you know, if you and I have got an apple, if one of us wants more apples, I've got to convince you somehow to give me your apple. And now you've got no apples and I've got 2. But if we have an idea, if I'm like, actually, I'm not going to eat the whole apple and chuck the core away, I'm going to eat the outside, I'm going to plant the seed, and I'm going to grow an apple tree. If I tell you that too, now we both have an apple tree grown, right? Like, my sharing my idea with you doesn't mean I don't have the idea anymore. And that's universal to any idea, right? Yeah. Whenever you have a good idea, if you share that, now the other person has the good idea too, and you both are better off. So coming up with new ideas, encouraging new ideas, figuring out how to make them work, I think is critical to everyone doing better. Yeah.
Although I 100% agree with you on that. Like, love every idea for 5 minutes is a great term, especially when you're dealing with people, right? And they're dealing with the way the world is at the moment, where we can be weird and crazy and you know, conflictive with people. And so I would hope everyone has a dream, you know, at night where they get to go off and look at the earth and imagine that with this tiny little ball, and we're all just trying to do cool shit together and, you know, support each other. Yeah, exactly. Hey man, I know you got a really busy day today with you know, I'm appreciative that you chose to come to us before 7 sharp, you know, by the way, you know, and so I'll let you get on with your day. So thank you so much for coming on, buddy.
Hey, no worries. Great to talk.
That was a really cool chat. We legitimately have an amazing space program in New Zealand, and I can't wait for the day that I walk around and see people wearing like Dawn Aerospace t-shirts and, you know, like NASA t-shirts, because it's just phenomenal that companies like this are born here in New Zealand, doing really interesting things, solving some of the gnarly problem that James and his team are solving, and doing it from Christchurch or other locations. It's fantastic. James, I really appreciated you coming in and talking us through, you know, what you've been doing, what's in the future, and you know, as we talked about, just sharing that information back down so other people might be able to look at this and say, we can do that too. And so thanks for everyone that stayed in and watched the whole episode. Thank you for our sponsors and Talent Army. This is the time where I really ask you to go down, check out whatever podcast platform you're listening to or watching this on. Give us a follow, subscribe, share it around for people that you might think might find this interesting. This was a really fun episode for me. I really love being in Christchurch. I've met some really remarkable people like James, and I just want to say thank you to the whole region.
This podcast is produced by John Otaka from Empire Films.